Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar series. First of all, I would like to just acknowledge that we're coming from you today from our Comox Valley Chamber Business Hub in downtown Courtenay, which is on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And today we are talking about strategic planning. And we are so lucky to have David Leverton from Leverton Associates joining us to present on this important topic. Introducing David, and please share your knowledge with us.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Carrie Ann. I will begin, obviously, with a bit of an overview on who I am. And of course, I am a management consultant and entrepreneur. I've been involved for many years in doing a lot of different work on behalf of various organizations and also involved in my own private sector activities. Of course, for our participants today, some may represent not-for-profits, some may represent for-profit businesses. The purposes of this presentation is to really cover both areas, so it should be all-inclusive in that regard. And as I mentioned, in terms of ourselves, Leverton Associates Ltd, we've been providing strategic planning services for 30 plus years for many different types of organizations within the private sector, as well as not-for-profit organizations, as well as government throughout BC, as well as other parts of Canada. And we are based here in the Comox Valley. For anyone interested in more information, they can go to my website, which is dleverton.com.
And I'm just going to jump in there, David, and just let everyone know we are keeping all of our mics muted for David's presentation, but I do have the chat open and am monitoring that. So if you ever have any questions come up about the content, then please just throw it in the chat, and we will make sure that we take some time to review those questions at the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie Ann. So the very first thing that I wanted to do was just to talk a little bit about organizational assessments. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times when organizations become involved in a strategic plan, they may think that it's really an all-encompassing document. And I think what's really important is just to clarify that strategic planning is just one part of the overall business planning cycle. And when I say that, there are several things which I look for, when I'm talking to organizations. Usually when I'm meeting with a CEO or meeting with board members, I always ask the question about whether they're an administrative or a governance-based organization. And, sometimes people wonder what I'm asking and why I would be asking that. But clearly, quite often what happens is that when you have very small organizations, then they will take on much more of an administrative function in terms of how that organization is being operated. Whereas when you're dealing with much larger organizations, then they're more governance-based. And usually what that means really is it's whether or not the board carries a much more hands-on control about what is happening inside the operation, or whether a lot of the day-to-day decision making and operational structure is left in the hands of the CEO. And clearly most organizations, especially larger organizations, have a very clear set of operating policies and procedures which the CEO and which senior management teams are operating within. And that is, of course, a really important requirement when you're running in a governance-based organization. Sometimes smaller independent organizations or private companies, they may have a very, very small limited staff and might just be one or two people. And then clearly they're administrative and function in terms of what they're doing. And so they might not have a really clear set of policies and procedures to oversee what's happening with their employees, et cetera. So it just depends on the nature of the organizations. Sometimes I also ask whether organizations have ever completed a SWOT analysis. And for people who don't really know what that means, it really is about an overall assessment about where your organization sits in the marketplace in terms of its overall strengths, its weaknesses, what may be perceived as its opportunities, as well as what threats may be out there. And so as a result of it, doing that kind of a careful analysis is part of an overall organizational assessment, which is an important part of putting together that overview for an organization. And of course, the strategic plan, which we're going to talk about today in great length, also is followed, most importantly, by an operational business plan. And the strategic plan, of course, provides the building blocks upon which a lot of the elements in the business plan are highlighted and discussed and implemented. So what is strategic planning? Well, really, it is, in the simplest form, it's a guide or it's a roadmap by which we establish the overall vision, the priorities, the values, and the direction of an organization or an actual business. And I'm going to use examples today, and when I go through this presentation, to explain what I mean. And the examples which I will be using are those from the Chamber of Commerce's own strategic plan. So you have a really clear sense of how the strategic planning process has been brought into play by the Chamber of Commerce here in the Comox Valley. So why do we need a strategic plan? Well, first and foremost, because it is the hallmark, the roadmap for guiding your current business strategy. It also provides very clear direction to your board members, to management, and to staff in terms of how you actually are operating as a business. This is really key because obviously if somebody is just joining your organization, they may not have any idea of how you actually operate. To be able to put a strategic plan in front of them, and I know myself, whenever I'm getting involved with any organizations, and I've operated and been involved in running several large organizations over the last 30 years, my very first question when I walk in to meet with a board is to ask them about the strategic plan and is it up to date? And by getting that, then it gives me a really clear sense about what their sense of overall direction is and what is happening within their organization. If an organization says to me, well, you know, we did one several years ago, but we don't have one in place now, well, then that for me is a bit of a flag because at the end of the day, then is it like a rudderless ship? Like, how do you know where you're going if you don't have any idea, you know, from the planning perspective? Likewise, if someone tells me that they do have a plan in place, but we haven't updated it in 10 years, well, once again, you know, we all know that the market conditions change, you know, annually. So it again puts a bit of a flag down to wonder where is that organization at in terms of really the long-term planning. And sometimes people will say to me, well, you know, we're just too busy. And you know, ultimately, I don't think you can ever be too busy to not actually take the time to have a proper plan in place. And lastly, of course, it offers stakeholders and or members and funding agencies, the public at large, insight into your overall operational and management objectives. And this is really key because quite often, if you're running a not-for-profit, especially, you know, you do have members that you're accountable to. Obviously, if you're a public company, you have shareholders that you're accountable to. In those particular cases, then they do want to have some insight about what your short-term and long-term plans are. And those, of course, are clearly laid out in your strategic plan. So who should be involved in the strategic planning process? Well, from my perspective, everyone who has a vested interest in your day-to-day operation of either your organization or your company. They should all be involved. And ultimately, you know, board members and members at large, the shareholders, the investors, they should be clearly aware. Your senior management team, because they're taking direction from your strategic plan. And then most importantly, your staff. Your staff should have a very clear idea of what, most importantly, your vision is, your mission, what your mandate is, and what your key goals are. You know, that so everybody has all their oars in the water and they're all pulling in the same direction. And so what are the major steps then in the strategic planning process? Well, there are really about 7 key ones. The first one, of course, is determine your vision, and we'll go through that in a little bit of detail. The second one is to understand your mission, and same thing, we'll go through that. Also, you need to be able to outline what your core values are. Within every organization, understanding what the foundational values are is really important to know. And then also your mandate. I mean, what is your overall purpose as an organization? And then also knowing what your key performance areas are. So these are, of course, referred to as your key goals. And we'll discuss these, and then also how you establish objectives or strategies for completing each of those key goals. And lastly, but most importantly, setting timelines and measuring your success. Because again, putting a document like this in place is valuable to have only if you use it. If it ends up on your shelf collecting dust, it was hardly worth the exercise of actually putting it together. So, first and foremost, determining your vision. So, a strategic vision should be aspirational, it should be relevant, it should be attainable, and it should be measurable over a specific period of time. And I usually suggest that it should be a minimum of 5 and maximum of 10 years. We all know that within any corporate structure or any operating entity that things change. I mean, all we have to do is look at the world pre and post COVID to know that things can come that you didn't anticipate, and you need to be able to be flexible, and you do need to be able to change things when necessary. And so here I'm going to reflect back a little bit to give you a sense of a vision. And this one is an example that is used by our and is actually adopted by our chamber. And the Comox Valley Chamber of Commerce strategic plan vision is to be an innovative and trusted member or business organization that contributes to the Comox Valley's diverse economic strength by influencing decision makers, educating, connecting with, and engaging with the community. And you can see now with this particular statement, it's one sentence, but there's a lot packed into this, right? I mean, ultimately, this is very high level thinking in terms of what the vision is for the overall chamber. And this may change from time to time. But clearly, this has been something that's been well thought out, and obviously has had input from a lot of individuals in terms of coming up with this as the overall vision statement for the organization. Now, understanding your mission. Now, here, trying to put together what you're hoping to accomplish today and within the next 1 to 3 years. This is more about the actual day-to-day operation. And this really should try and capture both the essence of your organization and really clearly explain in 1 or 2 sentences, what you currently do and why you exist. And in this case, again, if we reflect on the chamber, from the Comox Valley Chamber of Commerce strategic plan, their mission is to foster a positive and welcoming business environment by providing leadership, connections, advocacy, and services of value that create a prosperous economy. So this is that overarching statement for them that is basically leading the organization on a daily basis in terms of what they're providing to their customers and to their members on a weekly basis. Now, your mandate or your overall purpose, this gets down to the real, the kind of the real world reason for why you exist as an organization or as an actual company. And in this case, if we actually look at the purpose or the mandate, then for the Comox Valley Chamber of Commerce, it's to lead, connect, and champion business to ensure the Comox Valley is thriving and our region is the best place to live, work, and do business. You can see that every one of these statements, the vision, the mission, the mandate of the chamber, they're all different, but they're all very much interrelated. And so this is how you build out your overall overarching main strategies for your organization. Now, your core values that I mentioned earlier, these are your key character strengths. And they're the most important for accomplishing your overall mission. And in the particular case here of the chamber has identified for their key character strengths or values 4 key areas: community, member focus, leadership, and inclusivity. And if we drill down on each one of these, you can see in the sense of community and what that means for core values for the chamber. We believe our members are stronger because of their chamber connections. We celebrate and amplify our member success. We value and seek opportunities to collaborate with our provincial partners. So again, it gives you a really strong sense of what the chamber is all about, and who they want to engage with. Now, in terms of member focus, we are committed to providing optimal value for our members, ensuring quality in all aspects of our work, addressing the diverse needs of the business community, and empowering our members with the resources and support that they need to be successful. So once again, you can see, how this is an important core function for an organization like the Chamber. Leadership. We contribute to driving economic growth in the Comox Valley region as a policy leader and voice of business. We advocate for positive outcomes for businesses and to serve as the go-to for organizations for business retention and expansion. So once again, an important function as a core value. And the last core value, of course, is this one of inclusivity. So we represent the diverse identities, ideas, perspectives, and businesses of the Comox Valley and treat all fairly, equally, and without bias. So anyone who is to come into the chamber and decide that they wanted to buy a membership could ask for their strategic plan, could look at this and very quickly ascertain what the chamber is all about. They have a very clear vision, they have a very clear mission, they have a very clear mandate, and they have very well articulated core values. So understanding then that relationship between the vision, your mission, your mandate, and those core values, well, your vision is about inspiration and what you aspire to be. Your mission represents what you currently do. Your mandate is your purpose for existing. And lastly, your core values outline how you operate on a day-to-day basis. And if we take it one step further, your strategic plan then, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, is to serve as a roadmap to help guide your organization. It's also there to assist your members and your shareholders, as well as the public at large, in better understanding both your short and your long-term plans of the operation. And you also need, in order to make this come to life, you need to establish a series of key goals and objectives. These, of course, are the things which allow you to successfully complete your journey. And in this regard, some of the questions that come about determining the key high-level goals of an organization, to me, there are three key variables that you always need to look at. And ultimately, some people ask me, well, we have lots of different goals. And I go, yeah, but you only have several key goals. Within those, you may have a lot of objectives in terms of how you're going to implement those goals, and there may be sub-goals. But there are only certain things which are really high level. And so ultimately, your goals should always be, first and foremost, relevant. They should be achievable, and they should be measurable. I say all of that because, first and foremost, it's pointless for a board to give senior management a set of goals which, number one, have nothing to do with their day-to-day implementation of their organization. In other words, they're not relevant, so they can't really achieve them. And if it turns out that they're not measurable, that they're more quality based, they're not quantitatively based. So therefore, there's no way to actually go out and measure results. For example, if we were to say that the chamber wanted to increase their memberships by 100 people, 100 new members, well, that's a measurable quantity. Now, one might look at that and say, well, maybe that's not achievable, but it's a relative target. I mean, ultimately, one can debate what that should be realistically. Maybe it should be 10, maybe it should be 15 new members, but ultimately, it's a measurable, quantifiable figure. If we look at the case of the chamber, the Comox Valley Chamber of Commerce, their key goals and their performance indicators, they've actually laid out 4. So first and foremost, they have to grow and sustain membership. That's their number one goal. And out of that, I shouldn't say number one, that's not fair. These are 4 goals and they may all be of equal value, but this is the first one that's articulated. but to grow and sustain membership by strengthening the Chamber's value proposition and member services. And out of that, they've laid out 7 key objectives, okay, or 7 key strategies. And we'll talk briefly about those by way of an example. But ultimately, so for Carrie Ann and her role inside the chamber, this is really important for her. Because when she picks up that strategic plan and she sees one of the key goals is to grow and sustain membership, then for her, she realizes that, okay, this is speaking to my job description. And so this is really key for her. But ultimately, all of these key goals, they're all interrelated. The second one, advocate for an improved economic environment by elevating our position as the voice of business in the Comox Valley. Once again, here, they've identified 4 key objectives or strategies in order to accomplish that goal. The third one is to recruit and retain a high-performing team of experts. And so this is supported by another 3 key strategies. And all of these, in this last one, establish the chamber as an agile and progressive organization. Once again, they've identified an additional 4 objectives, but you can see the general trend here. I mean, ultimately, you've gone from creating that overall overarching vision, you've laid out your mission, you've now got your mandate in place. You're now starting to, take your core values that are important in all of that, and now you're rolling it into your key goals that you're trying to achieve. It isn't, you can't put everything down ultimately. And I always say that if an organization has 10 or 15 goals, I just don't know how you're in a bigger organization, maybe you can accomplish that. But when you have relatively small staffs, and certainly organizations such as chambers, it's having 3 to 5 major goals that you're trying to accomplish on an annualized basis is a pretty achievable goal. So establishing a clear set of objectives. Now, these are, again, the strategies for accomplishing each of those key goals. Now, similarly, these need to be realistic, they need to be timely, and they need to be quantifiable. And I always say that when you're an organization and you're putting this together as an overarching document, especially if you don't have one, you need to make sure that you don't set yourself up for failure, because that's the worst possible thing, right? And the other thing, which I always say, that when it comes to creating a strategic plan, it's a fluid document. Things change, and you need to be able to reflect on that. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. But ultimately, if you're a senior manager and you're going to be evaluated in terms of at the end of the year on your success in terms of how you've operated, then you need to ensure that your staff, what they've been asked to do truly is both realistic, that it really is relevant to the organization, that it not only is achievable, but it really is timely and it's measurable. Again, that is quantifiable. If we look back again to the Comox Valley Chamber of Commerce, you can see for goal number 1, they had 7 and have currently in place 7 key strategies, objectives. So for growing and sustaining membership, it's one thing to say you're going to do it. It's another thing to figure out how you're going to do it. And in their particular case, the how is first, they're going to evaluate the current membership structure and value on investment for members. So that's the first major objective that they've got for accomplishing that goal. Their second one is to review and enhance programs and initiatives, ensuring that they align with the evolving needs of the business community. And the third, create a membership engagement plan that includes best practices in onboarding and is available to their members. The last one, obviously, of this page, establish your membership benefits and levels that best fit your members' needs. And then if we look at the next ones here, developing a plan for regular and consistent membership surveys. So that's your quantifiable side, to determine key issues and ensure that they've got continued satisfaction. Creating an ambassador program to assist with recruitment and retention. And then developing a refreshed digital marketing strategy. Now, you can see that for this one particular overarching strategy or objective under that first plan goal that they have, this is a lot of work, right? I mean, that's a lot of things to try and accomplish. And if you look at it out and you say, well, okay, in the case of the chamber, their plan is from 2023 to 2026. So effectively, they've got a 3 to 4 year plan that's going to be in place. But when you look at all of these, and if at the end of an annual or a yearly basis, because the chamber has its annual report, it reports back to its members, its board members, change, new incoming board members. Everybody is looking at this document and seeing whether or not and how they're achieving all of these key goals and whether or not the objectives are being accomplished. And I always try and recommend that when you're putting out your goals and when you're laying out your objectives, you really do need to take it one step further and you need to put in some achievable targets. And I say that because if you take a strategic plan and you say, okay, this is what we're implementing over the next 36 to 48 months, and you actually lay that out and you put it out on a monthly basis and put it out on an Excel spreadsheet. And then you lay in over all of these different goals that you're planning on achieving. And then you start asking yourself, well, how many staff do we have? And what is it within each of these months that we want to try and accomplish? And then all of a sudden, you might find that you've actually got too many goals here and you've got too many things that you're trying to achieve, or maybe not enough. But you really do need to lay it out in such a way so that you can measure it and you can try and stay in line with it. And I say a lot of times that the most important aspect of this is to benefit staff and senior management in particular, because clearly when a board or when shareholders, when they give a CEO direction in terms of what they want to see accomplished, and they've actually laid these things out in black and white and in writing, and you look at it and then you start to implement it and you realize that, well, maybe I can't accomplish all of these. Well, then that's where to come back and reflect that you should never look at a strategic plan from a negative perspective that, oh my goodness, we haven't achieved what we set out to achieve. You should always look at it as it's simply a fluid document, which is there to provide a guideline. As I mentioned early on, it's a roadmap. Sometimes you hit detours. Sometimes you hit construction. Sometimes you hit things you just didn't anticipate. And so therefore you need to be flexible. You need to be able to change and modify your plan. And, even though time-wise, when we talk about how often should your organization review your strategic plan, well, I always say that, first of all, when it comes to implementation, it should be daily. Everybody in your senior management team should have a copy of the strategic plan on their desk, always close at hand. It should be reviewed by management and by your senior management team at least on a quarterly basis to see whether or not we're on track to accomplish it is what our board is expecting and what our members are expecting of us or our shareholders. And then ultimately, from a board's perspective, well, any incoming new board in that very first meeting, once they've selected who's going to be running the key roles of the organization at the board level, then the next thing is to pull out the strategic plan. And everybody, especially new incoming members, should not only be familiar with it, but then they need to have that as a grounding to figure out, are there things here that we need to modify and change? Maybe some of those goals need to be tweaked a little bit. Maybe we need to add in some new objectives, some new strategies here. Maybe we're not being quite as effective in a couple of key areas, as we had hoped to be. All of those things can be changed out on an annual basis. And then how often do you actually go out and re-engage with your stakeholders? And this is where you really are basically starting from scratch. You may not change out your vision, but you're really taking and now reviewing your existing strategic plan against the future. And this is the one where you're, looking into that crystal ball. You're really looking at and reflecting on how much you've accomplished. If you're an organization that's only been around for a few years and have undergone a lot of rapid growth, then clearly, you're going to be reviewing your plan on a much more regular basis. But if you're an organization that's been around for many, many years, and this is just one of those processes that you go through, while making sure then that you have actually done it in that 3 to 5 year timely period is really, really critical. And personally, for me, given the economics that we live in today, the challenges that we face, I believe that, really for most organizations, the strategic plan should be reviewed every 3 years. Because I don't know, I just always equate it back to my own life. When I try and say I'm going to work, I used to always say I like to work within 5 year plans. I find now 3 year plans are more realistic. It depends on the organization, but I do think we've got a lot of challenging economic headwinds out there in a lot of different directions. And sometimes, reviewing your overall vision and where you're going on a shorter timeline is better than doing it over a much longer time period. So that's it. And I'd like to open up the opportunity for any questions that anybody might have. And at this stage, I'll turn it back over to Carrie Ann.
Thank you so much, David. Is there any questions from any of our participants? You want to throw it in the chat there, John? I see your finger up. Oh,
Oh, your mute button, I think, is on, John.
hold on one second. I'll allow you to unmute. One moment, John. Should be able to do it now.
Yeah, Carrie Ann had control of my mute button. Well, thank you, David. That was a timely and a good review of the Comox Valley Chamber of Commerce. And at the outset, I guess I should admit that I am the chair of the strategic planning group of 5 people of the board. So I have a bit of a background in strategic planning, but not as deep as yours, perhaps. So I always look at strategic planning as a document of change. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
And so we have been going through a process, and in particular, in our SWOT analysis, I think the committee has decided that we have to do something, and it will be helpful to do something to increase our value proposition to members. And that is, we can do small things that are good at the margin, and we can look at doing a large thing. And so I proposed a rather large change in our current strategy that I have to say at this stage of the game, I haven't managed to convince my other colleagues that it's part of our shared vision. So we're right at the cusp of that as to whether we drop it or push it through. So I'm just wondering I mean, I can explain it. It's a bit long-winded, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on a process like that.
Well, I think, again, it's really important to, when I mentioned about having all the oars in the water go in the same direction, I mean, ultimately, ensuring that everybody is in support of the initiative is really key, which sometimes obviously takes time to work out. I think it would be a little more helpful if I had a little better understanding of the context. When we're talking about one big opportunity, are we talking, John, more about one goal, a new goal that would be added into the organization? Are we talking about something that would really affect the overall mission of it, or really affect it right at the vision level? Like what level of the organization?
Well, my concept was very much affecting the organization at the vision level. And in my career, I've noticed that certain people do a better job of re-educating themselves as we move along in our careers. And my personal anecdotal observation is that people who are involved in organizations that do T groups, for the lack of forums in YPO, probably do the best job of that. And so my concept was to institute within the chamber something that is akin to a YPO forum and give people the opportunity to join that and do it on a similar basis, in a similar manner and way to the way the YPO does it. I don't know if I presume you're familiar with that process in YPO.
Yeah. Well, I guess again, this just comes back to yeah, the overall governance or management structure of the organization. When you're making a major change at the vision level, I mean, that's something which, from my perspective, it's usually something which is provided. The board itself quite often will provide the input on the vision. But then if it's a major change in terms of the organization, and I say that because sometimes even, and you know this too, I mean, when it comes to the reporting function within CRA, a lot of not-for-profit charitable organizations, they very clearly articulate what their vision is, what their mandate is. Those things are quite often in their charter. So
Right.
ultimately, if you're changing the overall direction of an organization, then that's something which might be worthy of actually having more input, clearly from your members, in a bigger way. If on the other hand, what you're really doing is you're considering that it might be something strategic to look at. So in other words, rather than a wholesale change, we're going to invest in a short-term reordering of priorities. So we're going to start looking now at something that we might want to change in the future in a bigger way. But we're simply now aligning it more as a goal, within the organization. And so now it's being adopted at the board level as a goal, and then based on the outcome and the success of that goal, and again, the realignment of staff priorities to ensure that there's enough time in the day to get it properly accomplished. But if that new goal ends up taking you in a new direction and a new path, and you find that it actually is working at a much better level, and now all of a sudden you look at that and you go, well, now maybe we need to rethink what we're doing here at the vision level. Maybe we now need to begin to look at a whole new direction, a whole new path in terms of how we're operating. And so I guess, it may be one of those things that perhaps there's just different ways of approaching it, right, to accomplish the same objective. But on the other side of it, what my sense always is that when you have an organization that's operated under a strategy for a long period of time, if you're going to change that strategy structurally, and when I say structurally at the vision level, then you really want to test the waters, and make sure that you can quantify it, that it's measurable again, that the outcome is that it's actually achieved at the goal level, what it is that you really wanted to accomplish. And if it has, and then by all means to be able to say, well, okay, we're going to do things differently here. We're going to change our path. We're going to change our direction. But it's just, I guess it's just tempered in how one approaches it, because changing visions to me is always a really big deal, right? I mean, ultimately, when you just come right at it, and especially if you're doing it more, and I have no idea one way or the other on this, but I mean, I'm just saying, and sometimes if you're changing the vision based on quantifiable information, right? If you've already got measured results already in place, and based on that, you're changing it. But if you have a hunch that something would operate better under a new structure, but you really haven't measured that, you really haven't quantified it. When you're changing something at that level, it's one thing even to change the mission, because the mission is something that we all operate under 1 to 3 years on a mission. Missions change over time. I can speak to our own organization. I mean, we operate and do management consulting, but we also operate and have started up a new area which is on game development, board games of all things. And so as a natural result of that, we're seeing that growth. But again, how we're approaching that, we're looking at it within the context of Canada. We're looking at it in the context of the US. We're looking at it in the context of Europe. So our short-term mission is to grow it in Canada. Our longer-term mission, obviously, is to grow it into the US. Our vision, ultimately, out of all of that, is to one day have our game available to anyone around the world. But that's all lofty and it's all out there, but it's not the mission itself. What we're doing on a 1 to 3 year basis is being tweaked, changed, as we continue to grow this new business. John, I think you can appreciate this. It is always difficult, when you're looking at organizations, especially in not-for-profits or groups like chambers, as opposed to a for-profit business, right? Or even Crown Corps, government organizations. They're all very different in terms of how they're structured and who they're trying to serve. But it really does vary. I don't know if I answered your question, John.
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. I think it's a pretty long discussion, so maybe we should. I don't want to take up the time of this meeting, so perhaps we should go offline at some point, and I'll give you a bit more background. So
Sure.
thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Not a problem at all. And again, I'm always, and I've mentioned to Carrie Ann, for anyone who has been participating in these strategic planning webinars, if people do have questions or want to get together for a cup of coffee, have other things they want to talk about offline, I'm more than accommodating and available to get together in that regard.
Fair enough. Can you please clarify, is this the second of two or the first of two?
This is the second of two.
Oh, well, I apologize for missing the first one in that case.
Oh, not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. I said to Carrie
Very
Ann,
similar content to the first one. This one was a little bit more focused on the Comox Valley Chamber strategic plan.
Right.
Mhm.
yeah. Well, I found in the first one, and I was saying to Carrie Ann beforehand that, when you do these kinds of webinars and things, you always think, well, I wish I had have incorporated this or done this a little bit differently. And I thought at the end of my last one, even though I certainly, I received favorable, positive feedback on it, I thought afterwards, it would be nice to be able to reinforce it with some examples, which are real time. And so I thought by working, obviously, since the presentation is through the Comox Valley Chamber of Commerce, that it would be ideal to be able to ground it in their existing plan, so people could understand how that is brought in place. But again, it's very different from what you would do for a not-for-profit organization, as opposed to if this was a for-profit company, that was growing in leaps and bounds and trying to kind of stay ahead of the curve. But I always do, for me, when I talk about the roadmap and ensuring that for staff especially and for senior management, having those guidelines, having the guardrails in place, I guess. I see these documents in many ways as really providing a set of guardrails to employees, especially when, the strat plan is incorporated with these other key organizational, assessment things, which I talked about. And you mentioned, John, the SWOT, right? The SWOT analysis, which is so absolutely critical. And, for a lot of organizations, sometimes it's people don't have the time or whatever to sit down and actually go through and really examine, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what are the opportunities and threats that they face as an organization. And yet, to me, I think that that's one of the most important things, that an organization can be doing.
I completely agree. I think, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to look at our executive director's reports to the board, but I think it's helpful to know that on a monthly basis, when Tracy is reporting to the board what has been going on in the last month when we have our board meetings, she goes through the key goals in the strategic plan and reports on those one by one. And so the board is apprised. We relate, or the ED relates her report exactly to the key goals in the strategic plan, and is accountable to those goals as a result. And the board knows what's going on in the four key areas as a result. So I think it has certainly been a structure that's been useful.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And I can't say enough about that. I mean, ultimately, it holds everyone to account that way, and it's clear and it's concise. And ultimately, if you want changes, then ultimately, it's you get the opportunity as a board to be able to reflect on those. But I mean, ultimately, no, that's the way it should work, and that's really, I'm really pleased to hear that.
Good.
Well, I think we're going to wrap it up for now and just encourage everyone to reach out to David if they have any additional questions or clarifications. We will be sharing the slide deck with all of our participants, and we will be adding the recording to our resource library. So this will become a growing library of our webinar content and other resources that businesses and organizations can take advantage of. And yeah, I want to thank again David for joining us today and sharing his depth of knowledge around strategic planning. And yeah, thank you so much, David.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you so much for your questions, John. Appreciate that, and Carrie Ann, thank you so much to the Chamber and for the time to put this together. And as I say, if you are interested in pursuing other types of similar webinars in the future and areas of SWOT planning and or business planning, then I'm certainly very interested in giving you a helping hand.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right, all the very best.